And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on our podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Teru Clavel. She is an education expert, a columnist, a sought-after public speaker, and since 2010, she's been running her own education consulting practice, advising globally minded families on a range of issues that include multiple language acquisition, school choice, and how to enroll their children in U.S. universities. She just recently launched her new book, World Class, and has now been on The Today Show, CBS This Morning, Squawk Box, and Channel News Asia. And she also recently returned to New York a couple of years ago after being in Asia for a long time. So, welcome, Teru. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm well, Peter. How are you?
Great, great. So, I wanted to dive in because your story is a really interesting one, and it's a pattern that I see where somebody identifies a real thing. It could be in the business universe, it could be at home with education, solves the problem for themselves or attempts to understand the magnitude of the depths of the problem, and then fast forward 2 years, are now an expert in that space because on that journey of figuring it out, they've realized it's a big thing, they're passionate about it, and they really want to throw their hat in the arena and make change. So tell us, how did you get here? Give us the background of it.
Yeah, so I guess the best way to explain it is I grew up in the United States, mostly in the New York and Connecticut area. I was raised by a single immigrant Japanese mom, meaning I grew up bicultural. Japanese was my first language. So in 2006, at that point, I had two kids, and the opportunity came up for us to go to Hong Kong. And without batting an eyelash, I said, "Okay, great! I'll take my two kids to Hong Kong, and I'll educate them overseas." And at that point, we spent 4 years in Hong Kong from 2006 until 2010, and then two years in Shanghai until 2012, and then 4 years in Tokyo until 16, and then 2 years in Palo Alto, California. And then just last summer, in the summer of 2018, came back to New York. So we went kind of literally around the world and came home. You're right. And so you ask a good question, which is, how did I get to solving a problem? And the way I would say this is because I grew up speaking Japanese and English, putting my kids in the local public schools where we lived, and in Hong Kong we had our third child, so it was three kids, wasn't so foreign to me. But yet it was foreign because once you get there, you realize, wow, there are cultural barriers or language barriers or all these things. And then in 2011, I went back to school and I got a master's of science in comparative international education. And it blew me away because I am the first person to admit I thought it was going to be, oh, I'll read an article here, write a paper there, I'll download something
This will
here.
be easy. Right, right.
Yeah, totally. It was ridiculous. It was so hard. And I'd been out of school for like 2 decades at that point, right? So I'm old school, I'm trying to print things out using highlighters and tabs, and I think my classmates at that point were all only using online sources and copying and pasting and even citations. I was doing everything by hand. So it was a swift kick in the pants. It was a phenomenal educational experience. And while I was finishing up my master's, we ended up moving to Tokyo. So I had this kind of academic background through getting my master's, but also I was putting my kids in these local public schools. And what happened after I finished my master's was I got into journalism. So I started
Okay.
writing articles on education. And that kind of just happened because while I was getting my master's, I had this lull when I was getting my thesis approval. And I had this 1 month and I didn't know what to do. I was, going stir crazy because I was used to working at this kind of furious pace. And I started writing articles about things I was very passionate about
Right.
and getting rejection here, rejection there. And then I got a bite. And that's what led me to have a regular education column in the Japan Times. So through that also, I thought, wait, I think I have an idea for a book, but I couldn't figure it out because the first kind of shot that I took at it was very academic because I think I was in school and I was thinking that way. And it was so boring. I thought, nobody's going to read this. I don't even want to read it to edit it. So then I tried it again and made it much more personal. And I thought, this is not me at all. It's too memoir like. I'm not that kind of, I don't look back and get all, nostalgic. So I thought, okay,
Right.
now, so then what happened was when we came back to the US in 2016 and I put my kids in the local public schools of California, right? And California has the largest public school system in the country. I knew I had a book to write because then I could figure out how my experiences would be relevant to a US reader audience. So that was it. And so the 2016 to 17 academic year, I worked on a book proposal because I thought, at this point in my life, everybody says, if you're a first time author, you need a manuscript, don't
Yep.
bother submitting if you don't have one. And I said, I frankly don't have the time for that. Either you're going to like my proposal, my idea, or I'm not going to write the book.
So let's wait. I want to pause there for a second because a lot of people,
Yeah.
the idea for writing a book comes about. There's something passionate about it, whatever, and then they go to the so-called expert, and there's these rules of do this, don't do that, whatever. And I love that you said, "Well, I'm not doing that. Like that's going to take me 6 months, and if I can, if I can hack my way through it, great. If not, move on." Because I've seen people spend 2 years of their lives writing and rewriting and proposals and all that sort of stuff and gotten nowhere. And I'm like, wait a minute, what is the opportunity cost here? Like, and
Oh,
some of it becomes
totally.
a sunk cost thing. Like, well, it's only one more revision. What's another 2 months of my life? And and then it's like, so I love
Yeah.
how you just sort of hacked your way into it and said, and set that up front so you wouldn't fall into the rabbit hole.
Well, so this might be an interesting story for you and your listeners, which is in 2000. Let me get this date right. I want to say probably 2014 in the summer. There's a big writers conference, basically for first time writers, and it takes place, I think, the end of August. I think it's Writers Digest. Although don't quote me, I should look
Right.
that up. But it was in New York City, and I thought, okay, well, I happen to be in New York visiting my family. Stars are aligned. My kids are at camp. I should go. So I go to this weekend and, I signed up. I think at that point I had one chapter of some earlier draft written, and I signed up for these seminars and I attend these
Yep.
seminars, and they're all these agents and you're supposed to pitch.
Right.
And oh wow, I signed up for this one. Okay. And everybody's reading their first chapter. The first 5 pages, I think, is what it was.
Yep.
And frankly, I didn't even understand what they were talking about. It was like dystopian mythology, this and that. And I'm going, I haven't studied Greek myths since sixth
Yeah.
grade. I
Right.
don't even know,
Right.
and
Right.
it's not my thing. And I was going, okay, you know what? Now I have to read a chapter of my book to know if I have something, because clearly I don't. If my book is about, my kids overseas and what we can learn from the education systems overseas. And so I get to page 10, and then the agents at the dais table at the front were like, wait a minute, you're on page 10? And I got business cards at that point. And I thought, wow, okay, I have something. And so this is the bigger story, which is they have that pitch slam, right? Where they say you have 3 minutes with each agent, and it's like speed dating. And they say, prepare your elevator pitch. You have 90 seconds to talk. Then they'll reply with 90 seconds something. And then the bell will ring and then move on. And they said, but do not, under any circumstance, show up at our pitch slam and take a spot if you do not have a finished manuscript. And I thought, you know what? I'm living in Japan. I'm here for the
Sure.
summer. This is my one chance. I'm going to do it. So I go to the pitch slam. I'm on the Metro North
Right.
train from Connecticut to New York. I'm practicing the pitch the whole time, right? I'm looking out the window and talking to myself. And I get into the pitch slam, and there were basically two people that I really wanted to talk to, although there was one who was really at the top of my list. And I stood in line. I talked to her. I gave her my pitch, and they always ask you, "How far along are you?" Kind of like you're
Yeah.
pregnant,
Right.
right? How far along are you?
Right.
I'm like,
Are you
like,
showing? Right.
well, like, are you showing? And I'm going, well, actually, I have only kind of written one chapter. And she goes, it's fine, it's fine. I love your story. Take my card. Take my card. I love it. Stay in touch. It doesn't matter when you get it done. And then I was just hanging out in the middle of the room. I forget how long the whole session lasted, but she literally leaves her table, even though she has a long line. She runs up to me, finds me in the room, and says, "Give me your card. We are following up. Give me your card." She emails me that night and said, "You are one of two people I met today that I want to stay in touch with." That was 2014. And, I didn't produce anything that I thought was worth showing until the spring of 2017, when I had my book proposal. And I sent my book proposal to 10 agents, basically the top 10 agents that I wanted to
Sure.
work with. Although the woman that I'd met with at the pitch slam was the one that I really wanted to work with. But she didn't reply, and I just wrote her this email saying, "Thank you so much. It was lovely having met you. If it wasn't for your interest,
Right.
then I never
Right.
would have come this far." To make a long story short, she is my agent now.
Yep.
I love her, and I would have it no other way. So I didn't follow the rules. I broke the rules, and it worked out. So there you have it.
So now continuing the path of breaking the rules, the book, and I think more importantly, or as importantly, the movement underneath it, because this isn't just a book around some expertise that you have. You're actually advocating for a radical change in the educational system. So let's talk about you're starting a movement, whether that was the intent or not. So let's talk about that a little bit, like the book being a means to an end.
Sure. So the premise of the book is we have to fix what's wrong in the US education system, and there's a test that's administered by the OECD every 3 years that assesses 15-year-olds on an international scale. And the United States is squarely in the middle of the pack, and our scores are faltering actually. And we see our educational outcomes, just within the United States, they're falling as well in terms of numeracy and
Sure.
literacy and science. So when I came back to the US, I said, okay, this is a problem because my kids overseas did not have any of the issues that we're dealing with in the United States. And I felt like I had this experience that I had to share, and I felt a social responsibility to do so. So the book is part one of that.
Give a specific though, because I was reading a bunch of your stuff before, because I want to understand sort of how. I mean, you clearly saw this at home. What was the gap between your kids? You basically did an A/B test by accident
I
on your
did.
children,
I did.
right? So, what was which is every
Yeah.
scientist loves that, right? Particularly, first do no harm. But what was the gap? So your kids come back from having this experience being educated in Asia. What was the delta between? I don't remember what the grades were, but putting a fifth grader back into U.S. fifth grade. Like, how far ahead of the pack were they?
So my boys were 2 years ahead in math, and they have a different kind of a mindset, I felt like. And it's not, and maybe I'm not maybe, I am definitely supportive of their educations at home, but there is very much a can-do mindset where we were in East Asia. So there is no I'm bad at math. That just didn't exist. And when I came back
Right,
to the
right,
US, I was hearing that all the time. I met with principals, I met with administrators who would say things like, "Yeah, these kids, parents push them to learn math really early on, but studies have shown that they just can't do it." And I'd be sitting there aghast
right,
listening to this when I saw an entire nation, one of which had 1.35 billion people in it, do that math at that level. You know what I mean? So I'm thinking, what is the rhetoric here? What are people buying into that,
right.
there are all these self-imposed limitations
And an educator's telling you they're not good at, right? Of all
of all
people to be
people,
telling you.
and they're justifying it by saying, "Well, we use words all the time and we don't use numbers." And I said, "Well,
Oh
start
God.
start using numbers because their numbers are
Right.
everywhere. You can't live without numbers." But and then I started looking around the classrooms that I visited because in the 2016-17 academic year, or I'm sorry, 17 to 18 academic year, I traveled throughout the country and visited classrooms. And you look in any early elementary classroom and you see, God knows how many alphabets they have up on the wall. Some have four, some have five.
Right.
How many number lines and how many numbers? There's so few. Maybe there's one.
Interesting.
And there you have it, so it's kind of like this really this self-imposed, okay, we're going to study words, we're not going to really look at numbers. And I don't really understand why we do that in this country. So that's one area that I can tell you where we came back that was a huge that delta was huge.
Got it. And so now let's go back to the movement.
Sure.
Let's blink and it's 3 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever, and your wildest dreams have come true as a result of getting this out there. What does that mean? What will the impact on the world be, or on the educational system in the U.S. as a starting point be, as a result of people internalizing and understanding what you're saying, and then therefore advocating for change?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I'd love to empower parents and teachers to know that our kids can do so much more if you elevate the learning expectations.
Okay.
Right now I feel like, and there's a story that I tell in my book World Class, which is there's a student that came from Beijing to the US for high school, and she said in the US you just basically have to stay awake to be able to do your homework, you know? And which was like, "Oh my gosh," right? I mean, that's you can't say it any more clearly than that. And she said, whereas when I was in Beijing, she said, in math class we learn A plus B equals C, and for homework we get D plus E equals what,
Right.
And
Right.
she actually said only when I got to MIT was the rigor that is at the same level as I had in Beijing in middle school.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
so we can do so much more with our children. So I would love to empower parents and educators, and I give them the lists and tools and how we can do that in my book World Class. But on a grander scale, I would love for legislators to mobilize, and that's on the state level because we're talking
Sure.
most school funding comes at the local level. It's 45% local, and these are just rounded numbers. It depends on the state.
Right.
45% local, 45% state, and only 10% federal. So we can talk all we want at the Department of Education and the
Right. But
Washington
that's a
D.C.
rounding error almost. Yeah.
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 So what we really have to mobilize at the local and the state levels. And what I would love to see is we have this country that is so rich in diversity, right? We have people from all over. We have different beliefs, systems, cultures, languages, values, religions, and because of that, we're not really on the same page in terms of our ethics and.
Right.
But at the same time, we have to come together somewhere when it comes to education. So,
I agree.
what I think is imperative is, we're talking about huge socioeconomic differences right now, and it's only getting worse.
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So I've worked with several folks over the years that have created various movements. And to me, when I sort of dissect what's happened, I look at it and say, actually, there's three phases to this, and I'd love to get your reaction. Number one is awareness, right? We got to let people know here's a different way to think about X, whatever X is, and I could do that via, you're doing that via media, you're doing that via your book, you're doing that being speaking, whatever. There's lots of ways to just make people aware that there's a better way, a different way, another way for you to consider. Second phase is to get engagement. So a subset of people that are aware might choose to be engaged. Like, geez, what could I do at my local PTA level? What might I do? Can I tell some friends? I'm an educator. Whatever. What can I do to be engaged in this? And then the third level is a subset of folks that have been engaged to really become your activists.
Yep.
Sort of put your stuff through that model for a moment, if you would.
Sure. So I'm hoping world class in this media circuit that I'm doing does bring awareness to a lot of people, because it's very interesting to me that when I speak to a lot of parents and educators, they just don't know this stuff.
Right.
They don't know that there is an alternative. And I feel like in the US, people are spinning their wheels like, oh, well,
It is what it
we
is, right?
it is what it is, or we did this 10 or 20 years ago, so it doesn't work, or let's try this again. But it's really the same. It's old hat, we're just
Yep.
revamping the same strategy. So there has to be this awareness that there is another way and the engagement. So I am reaching out to a lot of thought leaders, influencers, even celebrities who are interested and have foundations in education and and helping community efforts at an early childhood level so that there is readiness, school readiness when they start kindergarten.
So those that you're engaging, I just want to point out the fact that they're celebrities and such. You're engaging with those that have the most leverage, right? Because they're more important to you than maybe your neighbor down the block or something in terms of their reach and impact.
Hopefully, yes. Those that have, on a very base level, the most followers on Instagram or Twitter, or are out there talking about this stuff, who already have that platform. So hopefully
Yep.
they will I can leverage their platform. But they have to have a genuine interest, because
Sure. Sure.
this is a big passion project. I mean,
Yep.
but it's
Yep.
an important movement, which leads to the activism, which is let's get out there. But it happens, I think, those are those concentric circles, right? You have to make change at your home level for you, I feel like, to make you can make that's the problem with education. I feel like it's like you can fight the school, you can fight the state, you can fight your district, but the change likely is not going to be felt by your own children.
Yeah. Right. So that's the disconnect here is even if you're wildly successful, by the time you're successful, it's really that next generation or maybe
Absolutely.
10 years out. So
Absolutely.
it's interesting when you don't see the direct benefit, but it's it's sort of the reverse of the tragedy of the commons, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. So you have to
Yeah.
figure out who are those people who are in it for the long haul.
Yep.
So that's why I say it's those concentric circles. You have to start implementing those changes, in your classrooms and in your home, and then have a longer term trajectory. Because again, I mean, if you have multiple children,
Sure.
which maybe are 10 years apart, then yes, maybe your youngest child will
Right.
benefit
Right.
from
Right.
what you're doing for your oldest. But typically, that's really not going to happen.
Right. Right. Not at scale.
Yeah, exactly, exactly, exactly. But hopefully if you get enough people involved and you get the right people opening their eyes to this, it's let's deal with these problems, because they're,
Right. Because they're big. Because
we
and they need to be
there's
dealt with.
it's
Yeah.
it's the next generation.
Right.
We talk about it's not just we're looking at the 15-year-olds around the world and where they are. It's like, okay, so let's look at what happens 10 years from now. Where are kids compared to those kids? And right now,
Exactly.
you talk about global competition.
No, it's not. It's not good. Yeah. So as we start to wind down here,
Sure.
any final thoughts? Because this is you're on this journey and it's sort of moving at 100 miles per hour here at this particular point in time. Any recommendations, suggestions, do's or don'ts to others, irregardless of the specific niche of content that they're focused on in terms of how do they get it out here? Because you're sitting in a great space right now based on all the things that you've done and the hard work and getting your knees scraped a couple of times.
And I think it's a good question right now. Hopefully, this is just the beginning for me. So maybe you can ask me the question in 5 years, and I'll have a lot more wisdom. But I would say, so here's an example. A week ago, or a week and a half ago, before my book came out, I was sitting at this coffee shop. I was literally wearing jean cutoffs, a white T-shirt, hair wet out of the shower, and glasses. So not looking that sharp. And I met a girlfriend. I met a girlfriend. It was 9 a.m. on a Sunday, and she said, And she said, "Is that someone famous?" And I said, and we're not very good like that. And I said, "Oh, yeah." And I turned around and it was someone famous. And I said, "This is one of those times you want your book." And she looked at me. She goes, "Are you crazy? You don't have your book with you. You have to have a book with you at all times." And I go,
Exactly.
I I guess I do, but the book hadn't come out yet. I just was kind
Yeah.
of relaxing. I hadn't thought about it. So to make a long story short, you just have to have guts. I got the copy of my book. I had someone bring it to me from my home. I then ended up having a 15-minute meeting with one of the most important directors, producers in Hollywood, who is now keenly interested. So I guess my takeaway and advice would be go for it. Rejection doesn't mean anything. It just puts more fire in your belly,
I love it.
and be passionate about what you do, because the worst thing that can happen is someone isn't interested. So what?
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much. I love the transparency and the journey and the tenacity and the guts, right? So I wish you all the best and I thank you for sharing your story with us. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Peter.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.